Chapter 7. What do you remember about chapter 6? Anything? That's what I was kind of afraid of. Well, if you didn't remember anything about chapter 6, you might remember something about chapter 7 because it's kind of one of the highlight things in the whole book of Revelation. But what we're going to start to see in chapter 7 is like an intermission. But like we finished up chapter 6, and then before the action cranks up in 7, there's a lull in there. There's a time to, kind of sit back and kind of check out, see what's going on, and get a perspective on the overview, maybe if you want to look at it that way. Then when we get to chapter 8, the 7th seal will be broken, and things begin to happen pretty quickly after that. So chapter 7 is where we begin this morning in verse 1. Let's read the first 4 verses, and then we'll go back and talk about it a little bit. And after these things I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the east, having a seal, or the seal of the living God, and he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels that we just met in verse 1, to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea. So those 4 angels are detrimental to the earth and the sea. Now notice in verse 1 it says don't hurt the earth, the sea, or tree, but in verse 2 it mentions only the earth and the sea. The tree is not mentioned. But saying, verse 3, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, so the trees are back in it, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. And I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. So we'll get to that in a moment. But let's take a look at this first part here, especially there beginning in verse 1. Notice this starts out by saying, and after these things. So this is a chronological progression. This comes after chapter 6. Chapter 6, we saw the 4 horsemen. We saw, the devastation that was brought by the wars, the civil unrest, the famine, the pestilence, the disease, and all of those things. And then last week we talked about the cosmological effects when the moon turns to blood, the sun is darkened, the stars start to fall, and all that. Now, I saw some puzzled looks last week, and not that that's anything new, because if you can follow what I'm telling you, then you're above average, because I don't even know what I'm saying most of the time. But if you look at the ending of chapter 6 in a purely physical way, where the physical elements are falling apart, where the stars are falling to earth and the sun goes black and all that, it's not going to take long for the earth to cease to exist, or mankind to cease to exist on the earth. So, but if you look at it from a symbolic way, and that was what I was trying to bring out last week, some of these things are symbolic in nature, and they deal with forces that are on the earth. When you're talking about mountains, you may be talking about governments that are mighty governments. When you're talking about islands, you may be islands that are governmental forces or countries that are not as powerful as the mountains. And we notice that all of those get shaken. They have a great earthquake that is worldwide. So if you look at it symbolically, then the whole world is beginning to go into chaos, even more so than it has already. Remember, 1/4 of the population, which can easily be over 1 billion people, have already died. And that within itself creates a lot of issues. But then things just get out of hand where governments cannot deal with it. You've got power struggle going on. The Antichrist is already established now, and some nations have given him a lot of power. Others are fighting against him, trying to retain the power, trying to overcome weaker neighbors, so to speak. And if you look at the situation now between Russia and Ukraine, you know, that might be something similar to what you might be seeing in this time that we're talking about there in chapter 6. But then they begin to fall apart. They can't maintain their continuity, and the Antichrist is gaining more and more power. Now, he has not yet come to world power. We haven't seen that yet, but we will shortly. But he's gaining power basically all the time, so to speak. Well, when we start to see this in verse 7, it says that there are 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth. Now, how do you see that? What is that? Is that 4 literal angels standing on a cube of the earth or a 4-sided earth? Well, we know the earth is round, so we might be talking north, east, south, and west. But is that what you see? Is that what you're looking at in that? It may be. You know, a lot of this stuff is somewhat obscure to us. It's kind of like looking through an opaque glass. You can see an image out there, but you're not real sure what it is or who it is or something. But notice it says, I saw 4 angels. This is John speaking now. So he's looking up into the heavenly realm. He's not looking on the earth per se, but into the heavenly realm. And he said, I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, and they were holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor the sea, nor any tree. What is the wind? Is it the literal wind? Are we talking about tornadoes, hurricanes, those kind of things, you know, strong winds that are being held back at this point in time? Or is the wind something else? Thank you for studying. I appreciate that. All right. Think about what kind of shape the world is in. Pestilence, war, civil unrest, disease, all of these things going on. 1 billion people plus have already died because of that. And we look back at now at what's going on the earth. What if, and I'll be perfectly honest with you, I cannot give you 100% scripture to back up everything. So, you know, you're going to have to read this one and work it out on your own. But what if these are symbolic things? What if you go back to Matthew 24 that we studied on, and Jesus is approached by the apostles, and especially by 4 of them, the kind of the inner circle, Peter, James, John, and Andrew, and he is asked this question, what's it going to look like? Morning, Miss Ginger. What's it going to look like in these end times? Because he's already told them that the temple is not going to be there very long. It's going to be destroyed. There won't be one brick lying upon another brick, so to speak. In other words, it's all going to be taken down. What was the very first thing he told them to look for in the end times? Remember? He says to watch out for false prophets. Now, the winds of doctrine. So the 4 winds may refer to the fact that there's over 4,000 religions in the world right now. You know all of them aren't true religions. But maybe he's talking about in these 4 winds that people are being inundated with lots of false prophecies, false teachings, false hopes in a God that doesn't exist, and that they are searching for something. If you were living in the circumstances that are described in chapter 6, would you not be looking for something to alleviate your pain, to alleviate your anguish, to alleviate the fear and the panic that you might be suffering? Obviously we would. Any of us would. And so they're turning, looking for everything. And so Jesus says the first thing that you need to be on the lookout for is false doctrine. So when it says he asked, they told the four, or told the angel, look at verse 2, and I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. Now, representatively, the east probably refers to Jerusalem, but I don't know that to be a fact either. But or for Israel at least, having the seal of the living God, and what does he do? He says or cries out in a loud voice to the four angels to whom it was given to hurt the sea, the earth and the sea. And what does he say to them? Verse 3, hurt not the earth, neither the sea nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. Well, if we're talking about false doctrine, and this angel tells the other four angels, hold off and don't do anything, but hold these false doctrines in abeyance. Don't let the wind of false doctrine blow, in other words. But how does that fit into the earth, the sea, and the trees? When you see symbolically in the book of Revelation, you can see the sea is normally talking about the Mediterranean Sea. But when it speaks of the sea symbolically, these are the unregenerate souls of mankind. These are the lost people of the earth. These are the unbelievers. And the magnitude is like the sea compared to the land. There's a lot more water on this earth than there is dry land. And so he's talking about potentially here, if we're looking at it in that symbolic methodology, that these are lost souls. These are sinful souls that he's saying keep the false doctrines away from them. Now, why would you keep the false doctrines away from them?
Give them a chance to hear the truth.
Give them a chance to hear the truth, but who are they going to hear it from? Well, we hadn't gotten there yet. But think about that. When he's talking about the earth is on a higher level than, the dry ground is on a higher level than the sea. And this may represent saved people, but they are still living a very carnal life. And you say, well, why would they be doing that? Well, why do they do it today? There's saved people that if you don't have the program, you can't tell the Christians from the lions, if you think about it, because they live just like the world. But at some point in their life, they were saved, and the Lord still got their name written in the Lamb's Book of Life, and it will remain there. But they're living a life of worldly pleasure. That's what they're seeking out. They're not looking for they're not trying to serve God. They're serving themselves and their own individual desires. 1 John chapter 2, 15, 16, and 17 talks about the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. The three basic sins that almost everything else falls into. And there are Christians who are living that type of life. You say, well, how do you know that? Do you know how many people are on the roll of this church? There's over 200. And how many are here this morning? It will be less than 100. Now, some are traveling and some are sick, but there are people who could be here that aren't here because they're not interested in serving the Lord right now. They're interested in whatever they're doing and whatever might be going on in their lives. And that's true all over the country. Then what would the trees represent? Now, if you look at in Genesis, you see that there's the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. If you look in Psalms chapter 1, David says that the man who abides in the law of God is as a tree planted by the water. In other words, he nourishes him and he's growing and putting forth fruit for the Lord. So if we're looking at this symbolically, the tree may represent saved people who are trying to serve God. Now they're targeted in this point in time, obviously, and it's going to get even worse right after the midpoint of the tribulation, going into the Great Tribulation. So the winds of doctrine, the winds of falsehood, permeates all of society, but all of a sudden it looks like that God says, hold all the false stuff back because I'm going to give them an opportunity to hear the truth. All right? So, the first warning was that Jesus gave in Matthew 24, verses 4 and 5 was be careful or be aware that there's false doctrines and don't be drawn in by them or anything like that. So Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 14, if you want to look at that. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 14 says that we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine, there's the word wind again, by the sleight of men and the cunning craftiness whereby they lie in wait to deceive, but speaking the truth in love may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ. And then, of course, I would suggest you read the rest of that whole paragraph there. But Paul speaks of, the winds of doctrine, the winds of false doctrine. So it appears, and again, you'll have to study and decide on your own, but it appears that what we're looking at here is that the Lord is going to hold back in abeyance the false doctrines for a period of time, and he's going to allow people of the earth, all over the earth, to hear the true gospel, giving them a chance to be saved. Do you see how much love God has when he does this? I mean, the whole world, so to speak, is against him, is doing everything they can to turn away from him. They're trusting in man, they're trusting in government, they're trusting in money, they're trusting in everything but God. And yet he still loves mankind so much that he's making a way for them to escape if they'll take it. If they will take it. So he warns about there in Ephesians, and of course, I believe also is what we're looking at here in Revelation 7 this morning, about those false prophets and things that are, and false doctrines that are coming. And then you look at verse 3, he says, hurt not the earth, hurt not the sea, hurt not the trees, till, so there's something else coming, we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. Now, who are the servants of our God? Well, there are saved people on the earth at this point in time. We've talked about that. We've seen under the altar and the fifth seal being broken back in chapter 6, where there was a number of people, a multitude of people, who are under the altar who have been, they've either starved to death or they've died of some disease or they've been killed, and they have believed prior to that, and now they're under the altar. But he says, the angel says, to these other four angels, hold off, just wait until we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. And then John tells us, and I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. Now, if you study this, and you read people who are theologians and who are steeped in many different ways of studying the scriptures and all of that, you're going to find some discrepancies. And one of the big discrepancies is that they believe that the 144,000 is either a symbolic number, not an actual number, or that it doesn't apply to Israel, it applies to the church. Where is the church when we get to this point? The church has already been raptured out. How can a smart guy that's supposed to know the Bibles come up with that kind of idea? Well, I don't know.
Verse 5 through 8.
So, well, we ain't got there yet.
He hadn't either.
He hadn't either. You're right, Sandy. So, but, people, and unfortunately, people who are looked at as scholars and looked at as smart in the scriptures and things of that nature come up with ideas that they cannot back up scripturally. And one of those, in my estimation, and I'm certainly not a scholar, is that when you say that this represents the church, when it's very clear the church is no longer on the earth, I don't know how you balance that out. I don't know how you rationalize that. But anyway, you're going to find some different things if you start reading that. I would suggest that you take verse 4 as an absolute fact, just like it says. There's 144,000 Jews. Now, why should we do that? Well, then we get to verse 5 and following. And so of the tribe of Judah, which is the tribe that Jesus comes from, and the tribe of David that he came from, were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Reuben were 12,000. Of the tribe of Gad were 12,000. And it goes through the whole list. The tribe of Asher, the tribe of Nephilim, the tribe of Manasseh, the tribe of Simeon, the tribe of Levi, the tribe of Issachar, the tribe of Zebulun, and the tribe of Joseph, and of the tribe of Benjamin. So it lists 12 tribes, and if you take 12 tribes, 12,000 each, then you get 144,000. Now, I'm sorry, I thought somebody had a comment. The 104.
You have a gross.
Yeah,
Math,
pretty.
12 times 12 is a gross.
There you go. There you go. So here you've got 1,000 grosses. All right. All right. Now, one of the things that we need to look at, I think, it names all the tribes. Are these the same tribes that are mentioned in Genesis chapter 35?
No, there's one missing, and that's Dan.
Yeah. Where's Dan? You know?
Yeah.
Okay. There's another one missing.
Ephraim.
Where's Ephraim? Two of the tribes, two of the sons of Jacob, who were tribes in chapter 35 of Genesis. Let me find it right quick. Just read it. Don't take my word for anything. Check me out on all of it. Genesis 35, verse 23 says, the sons of Leah, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, and then you got Benjamin. Did we mention Benjamin? I don't think so. And Joseph. So there's two missing, Dan and Ephraim. Why are they missing? Why are they not among the 12,000 from their tribe?
They worship idols, Dan. Worship idols.
Okay. If you go back to Judges chapter 18, what you're going to find is the story of Dan. When Dan went into the promised land, and we don't have that up, and anyway, when Dan went into the promised land, they were given a piece of land, just like all the other tribes. But they never conquered the land. They never were able to take control of it like Judah and Ephraim and others did. So at some point, when you get to Judges, they decided, let's just move out of here and find us a better place that we can take over, that we can call ours. So they go north. And in going north, they go through the land of Ephraim. When they get into Ephraim, they run into a guy by the name of Micah, who has graven images in his house, has his own shrine, and who has been able to lure a priest who is a descendant of Moses' son Gershom to be his private priest. But now he's leading him in false worship to idols. Well, they meet him, and now this is the advanced scout that's looking for the land to go to. they meet him, they talk to him, they go in, they see what he's got in the house, and they talk to the young man who's the priest, whose name is Jonathan. And, they go on about their business. And they go on up north, and they get to an area called Lachish, Laish. And when they get there, they find that the people are undefended. They don't have any walls around their city. They don't have any arms. They're just farming people, agricultural people. And they say, we can easily overcome these folks. So they go back to Dan to lower the southern Dan into their people and tell them what they found. And everybody agrees, let's go up and take that city, and that'll become Dan. Well, on the way up, the second time, they stop at Micah's house, and they take his graven images, and they convince Jonathan to come and be the priest for the whole nation of Dan, not just for Micah and his personal use. And so he goes with them. When they get to Lachish, they kill everybody, they take over the whole area, and they establish the tribe of Dan there. So from the south, now they've moved to the north, but not at God's direction. They've done it on their own, and they have become a false idol worship nation. The whole nation worships these false idols. Now, when you look at the tribe of Manasseh, who is one of the sons of Joseph, they have a huge tribe and had the largest land mass when they moved into the Promised Land back under Joshua's reign. And so Manasseh is not listed in chapter 35 of Genesis. Dan is. So Manasseh may have taken Dan's place in Revelation, because we have people from Manasseh listed there. Yes, ma'am.
Did you notice, I'm asking, did you notice in Revelation there, Manasseh's mentioned, which is a half tribe of Joseph. Ephraim is not, but Joseph is mentioned too.
Right.
He got a double portion.
Like he was supposed to.
Yeah, one of it was.
Yeah.
So Joseph, when they mentioned Joseph, that took the place of Ephraim.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, why did Joseph take Ephraim's place?
Well, he was his son, and they didn't mention Ephraim, so I guess that's.
Okay. If you go to Hosea, you will find in chapter 4 and chapter 7 indications about the tribe of Ephraim. And Hosea 4:17 says, Ephraim is joined to idols. Ephraim became an idol-worshiping nation also, just like Dan did. In chapter 7, especially verse 12 in chapter 7, relates to the sins of Ephraim and the judgment that God put upon them. So when you take Ephraim out, he's replaced by his father, Joseph. And so now we have the 12 tribes in Revelation that don't jive with the 12 tribes in Genesis, but by explanation of centuries of history there that we can go back and look at, we've got a pretty good idea that this is why the replacement was made. Now, why was the replacement made? What is the function and the focus of the 144,000? What are they going to do? They are going to evangelize not only Israel, but the entire nation, the entire earth. They will be focusing on Israel, some of them will, but they're going to go all over the earth. And there's a scripture we'll talk about here in a minute that'll reveal that. But why would God allow the tribe of Dan, who has turned to idolatry? And you remember back when Solomon died and the nation split between Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And Jeroboam took the 10 tribes and became Israel, and Rehoboam took Judah and Benjamin and became Judah. Where did they worship? Where did Israel worship at that point? Did they go to Jerusalem and worship with the rest of them? No, Jeroboam even said, you know, if these people keep going back to Jerusalem, we're going to lose them. They're not going to keep following me. They're going to start going with their brothers and there in Jerusalem. They're going to start following the God again. So he set up a temple or a worship place in Bethel, but then he set up another one. And where was it? In Dan. That became the central worship, one of the central worship locations for the whole nation of Israel in Dan. God is not going to allow, I don't think, and that's what all this is leading to, he's not going to allow Dan to be one that's going to spread the gospel because they have spent centuries spreading false gospel. And Ephraim, who was Joshua's nation or tribe, which committed to him, we're going to serve God. When he asked them, who will you serve this day? And they committed they're going to serve God. Well, then after he died and the old people died and all that, Ephraim fell apart. And they began to serve false gods. And like we said in Hosea, it says Ephraim is joined to idols. He's not going to utilize them as true evangelists. It doesn't appear. All right? So, something to think about. But you will not find correlation between Genesis 12 tribes and Revelation's 12 tribes, and I think in the study that I've done, that's why. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
I just saw something in that fourth verse. This is the word of God. And if he says, and I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of Israel. But he didn't say that every tribe was going to have 12,000 of the tribes of Israel.
Right.
Now he named, of those that he named, there were 12,000. But like you said, they weren't, Dan and Ephraim were not mentioned.
Okay.
So
All right.
that's God's business, isn't it?
That's right. That's his choice.
You know, whoever he decides.
When you see the number 12 in Revelation, what does it refer to? Generally, it's going to refer to Israel or something that's associated with Israel. There's 12 tribes. There are 12 stones in the priest, I forgot what they call it, that the priest wears. There's 12 apostles that were called by the Lord. There's 12 judges, there's 12 gates, there's 12 loaves of bread, shewbread on the table in the tabernacle and all that. So anytime you see the number 12, it's probably going to relate to Israel in some fashion. So, you can kind of be looking for that. Now, when it says the 144,000 in verse 4, which were sealed, what does sealing mean? What is that? What's going on with sealing? Seal to what? Seal for what? Seal how? You know?
That's set in stone.
Are they going to have a mark on their head or something that you can see? Don't know. When Moses came down off the mountain, he had an aura about him that everybody could tell something had happened, that he'd been in the presence of God. But you have the apostles, they weren't sealed, a visible seal or anything like that when they were spreading the gospel. So maybe it'll be visible, maybe it'll not. Maybe it will not, I don't know. But what are they sealed to and what are they sealed from? Well, we'll learn as we go on through this that they're sealed from harm. They cannot be killed. They cannot be accosted. And don't you think that the world, when they heard it, and that somebody's going to try to take them out? Won't happen. They're sealed from harm. They will not be nobody will be able to successfully attack them and kill them until the Lord is finished, or they have finished their work for the Lord. In fact, David Jeremiah has said, you may have heard him say this, that a man who is doing God's will is immortal until he finishes the job. So whatever God's got for someone to do, if they're doing it, if they're trying to accomplish God's will, they don't have to worry about death until God gets through, or they get through with the work that they're doing for the Lord. So what are they sealed to? Well, they're sealed to evangelism. And not just in Israel, but all over the world. And you say, well, how do you know that? We're going to find that out as we learn more about them in chapters that are to come yet. So they're sealed from harm, and they're sealed to the work of the Lord. And they are of the tribes that are listed there. You say, well, wait a minute. If you go back to 722, well, if you go to Jerusalem today, you go to Israel, and you ask someone over there, are you a Jew? And they are, what are they going to say? Yeah, I'm a Jew. If you say, what tribe are you from? What would they probably say? I don't know. Why? Because in 722, when the Assyrians took Israel, the northern 10 tribes, they transposed people into Israel, and they transposed Israelites into what is the area of Babylon now, because at that time they controlled it, and Nineveh and all over in there. And they encouraged mixed races. So they lost their identity. Sometimes you might hear them referred to as the 10 lost tribes. But the thing about it is, God knows who they are. And God knows if somebody's in the lineage that he needs them to be in. And so maybe a Levite marries a Levite, but their history goes all the way back to 700 BC, and it's remained pure throughout that time. Now that would be a coincidence. That would be a miracle. That's just God doing what God does. He kept those bloodlines true in certain people, waiting for this day.
Brother Nelson,
Yes, ma'am.
have you done any research on Israel, modern Israel and the Levites?
No, ma'am.
I just wonder, they didn't get any land.
Right.
I wonder in modern Israel, now that they've gone back, where do they live?
Levites were given cities,
Yeah.
and they were the priest of those cities in the surrounding area. They weren't given a land, so to speak.
Right.
So Manasseh and Ephraim got, in the original, got what the Levi was going to get. One of those did. And so, but no, I have not studied it.
If the government or something, if you're with the tribe of Levi, if they automatically get a townhouse, somewhere, I just wonder.
I don't know. I think my first impression is a lot of those Levites don't even know they're Levites, because they were part of the ones that were taken to Assyria and intermarried either in Assyria or in Egypt, Israel. And so I don't know that they even know if they're Levites or not. They may be serving in the position of a Levite as a priest, but they may not be of the tribe of Levi. I don't know. So the first thing we notice that there's a chronological order laid out here, that the 144,000 are sealed. And then what do we see? Well, look at verse 9. After this I beheld, and lo, a great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and people and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands. If the winds of doctrine are held back, and the 144,000 are chosen and empowered to spread the gospel worldwide, because it says kindreds and people and tongues, so that's everybody had an opportunity to hear it, then we start to see God's work in this, how he wants the world to hear the true gospel and accept him. The second thing we notice is that the number that is represented is innumerable. These saved people, the ones who accept. And notice where they are. They're not in Israel, they're not in America, they're not in Africa, Where are they? Verse 9. Says that they are before the throne, before the Lamb, in white robes and palms in their hands. They're in heaven. They've been killed or they have died. Not the 144,000, but those who are saved by their preaching. Yes, ma'am.
I think that this verse also tells us that there's not going to be a lost tribe out there who has never heard about Jesus.
Absolutely.
He knows if he can personify himself in the Old Testament, he can do it again.
Absolutely. Everybody will hear the gospel, at least during this time. But even today, there's methods that are in play that they can hear the gospel, which is one of the things that Jesus said, in Matthew 24. The gospel will basically reach all the ears of the whole world. So all nations, all kindreds, all people, all tongues. So worldwide, there's not just going to be a Jewish revival, if you will. There's going to be a worldly revival. People talk about, this is one of the viewpoints that people take about Revelation. Well, the Lord won't come back until we, now, current, go out and start this great revival. The great revival will come during the tribulation. The great falling away comes before the rapture. Matthew 24. Then the fourth thing you notice that they're clothed in white robes. Well, the ones that are under the altar in the fifth seal that's broken, back in Revelation 6 and verse 11, had on white robes also. So this is a sign that they are at peace now, that they're with the Lord. And notice what they're holding. They're holding in verse 9 palm leaves. What does that signify?
Symbolic of peace.
Peace. That's peace. They're at peace now. They don't have to worry about what's going on in the world anymore. They've been killed or they have died, and now they're with the Lord. But this is where people who say, well, that's the church. The church isn't given palm leaves when it gets before the Lord. The church is given crowns. These people don't have crowns. These are tribulation saints only, not the church, not pre-rapture saints. All right? So, we see about these folks, and we see that there's a huge number of them. But then we have to understand that at some point, apparently, although it doesn't specifically say it, or at least I haven't found it, that God withdraws the four angels and says, okay, get back at it and let the false doctrines go again. It apparently happens because the Antichrist, who hasn't taken on the role of religious, paragon yet, will become or will have a doctrine. And you remember what it says about it, that even the saved could be turned if it were possible. If they could believe it, they could become a follower of his if it were possible that they lose their salvation, which is impossible. And so John's looking at all this, and he's trying to take it in, and he's trying to make, some semblance of rationality out of it. But he's having a hard time doing it. Verse 10, it says that the great multitude that you could not number, that stood before the throne, cried with a loud voice, saying, salvation to our God, which sits upon the throne, and unto the Lamb. And all the angels stood round about the throne, and all the elders, and the four beasts, the elders being the 24 elders we looked at back in, I think, chapter 2. Chapter 5. And fell before the throne on their faces and worshiped God, saying, Amen, blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be unto our God forever and ever. Amen. And John's seeing all this. And this has to be a magnificent sight. But the problem is he doesn't understand what he's seeing. Now, how do we know that? Look at verse 13. And one of the elders answered, saying unto me, what are these which are arrayed in white robes? And where did they come from? Okay, so that's the question. Who are they and where did they come from? He doesn't understand. In verse 14 then, I said to him, Sir, you know, you've got that information. You have that knowledge. In other words, I don't know, but you do. And he said to me, this elder says to John, these are they which came out of great tribulation, not the great tribulation, which is the second 3.5 years, but out of great tribulation, which is the first 3.5 years. The second half has not begun yet, because this is going in chronological order, because we started out in chapter 7, verse 1, and it said after these things. So it is going in chronological order. How will we know when we get to the midpoint? How will we know when the Great Tribulation, what event triggers the Great Tribulation? The second 3.5 year period.
Is it when the beast declares that he's gone?
Yes. When the Antichrist goes into, and you notice he's not a religious figure here yet. He's only a governmental figure. But when he goes into the temple, the really newly constructed temple, and he proclaims that he is God and that everybody should worship him as God, and the Jews finally realize this is not who we thought it was, and they flee, and he makes a commitment he will kill every one of them and kill every Christian, every believer. And that is the threshold of the second half, called the Great Tribulation. So, the Great Tribulation hasn't happened, but a Great Tribulation has. And it says they have washed their robes and have made them white in the blood of the Lamb. These are saved people. These are not just folks that showed up in heaven, like you could do that. But this is what the remnant, so to speak, of the preaching of the 144,000 results in is an uncountable number of people being saved. Verse 15, therefore are they before the throne of God, because they've been washed in the blood of the Lamb. And they serve him night and day in his temple, and he that sits on the throne shall dwell among them, and they shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more, neither shall the sun light on them, nor any heat. Remember what was going on with the tribulation? You know, the food shortage, water shortage, the scorching of the earth, which the major scorching of the earth has not occurred yet, but it will. And then verse 17, for the Lamb which is in the midst of the throne shall feed them and shall lead them unto living fountains of waters, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. Now, how do we make application of chapter 7? What can we do that fits into chapter 7? You can be just like one of the 144,000. There's going to be 144,000 at this time that are preaching the gospel and preaching repentance. But out of the saved who hear that message and accept it, some of them are going to carry that message on out. Now, they're not going to be protected like the 144,000 are, but they're going to share the gospel. That's what we need to be doing today as God's people. All of God's people need to be sharing the gospel, because this world, as you well know, is going down the tubes quickly. This country is going down the tubes quickly. If you live another 50 years, America will not look like what it does today. In fact, it may not even be in existence. But
It doesn't even look like it looked when I was a kid.
no, look what it's done the last 30, 40 years.
People's attitude
Yeah.
toward the church, toward morality, towards the government,
Yeah.
toward our flag, patriotism. It doesn't.
Everything's
it looks
changed.
Nothing like it did when I was.
And it will continue to move farther and farther and farther away from the Lord. The great falling away. Whether we realize it or not, we're that close to eternity.
Amen.
That close.
Praise the Lord, and pass the ammunition.
There you go.
Can I,
All right. Yes, please.
I just thought it was interesting because I always start the verse when I'm talking about very little. And of course, what you said intrigued me. And so I started looking up, and I know some scholars debate on if it was written in Hebrew first and then translated to Greek, or since John was Hebrew. But I just thought this was cool. The word "see" in Hebrew means reed. And if you go back to Matthew 12:20 or Isaiah 42:3, it says a bruised reed will not break. We're people who are weak in grace will not break. And then tree, if you refer back to Psalm 123, which I thought it meant, a tree is representative of believers who are strong in the faith. And so holding back the winds from the sea, the reeds, weak believers and strong believers, that just makes so much sense to me. And I thought that was cool that sea in Hebrew means reed and how people are referred to in reeds in scripture.
There's very few things in the scriptures that will not be explained, but you have to dig it out. It's not all, sometimes it is, it's very plain. Sometimes it's pretty covered over and you have to dig it out, just like April did there, so